message. Rishi Markandeya recounts the story of Savitri to Yudhishthir, essentially with the instant intention of consoling him and encouraging him out of his plight of grief and suffering. He has lost his kingdom in a game of dice and has been ordered to stay in the forest for a period of 12 years, which is to be followed by 1 year of dwelling in disguise. Exiled and stripped of the Kshatriya pride, all the five brothers, and with them their common wife Draupadi, accept the lot that has fallen on them. But their miseries are not yet over this ordeal alone. Even in the forest, the Pandavas are constantly harassed and persecuted by their enemy. The loss of royalty is no doubt very painful to them, but the evil treatment given to their wife is more distressing and is the main cause of their melancholy and their agony. This can be no greater insult to an upright person than to witness, in a state of unmanly helplessness, the humiliation of a woman. On an earlier occasion, Draupadi was dragged into the assembly hall with none of the elders coming to her rescue. Later on, in the forest, she was abducted by Jayadratha. It is in this mood of dejection that Yudhishthir inquires of Markandeya whether he had met or heard of any woman who, despite being chaste and virtuous, had to bear the inner wounds the way Draupadi did. The rishis narrating the story of Savitri is not only to provide a parallel by the way of illustration, pronounces the ideal of womanhood and elaborates further how conduct in the dharma can be means of proper salvation in all the circumstances of life. Virtue never goes unrewarded. The deep sorrow by which Savitri had been afflicted turned finally into happiness. By her devotion and by suffering greatly for the sake of her husband, the young pious lady had not only saved him from the doom, but also brought prosperity to both the houses. Markandeya assures that Draupadi too, because of her nobility and chaste conduct, shall prove to be a fortune bringer to the Pandavas. Alleviation of grief and suffering is the one immediate purpose of the narration, but suggestions are made at various levels, ranging from the mundane social to the profound occult spiritual. A whole culture based on truth values and two interpenetrating each other is what this little episode brings vividly to us from a time that itself was molded by the thought vision of a rishi poet. A kind of heroism emerges in upholding all that is noble and elevating, a heroism that brings prosperity not only in life here in this world, but afterwards beyond too. Righteous conduct turns out to be its own reward. To follow the path of the true in an evil circumstance of existence is itself the process of eliminating that circumstance and transcending it. The great have done it and made the way sure and safe. They have accepted miseries and misfortunes of life only to deal with them in the conviction and strength of their ideals and principles. In the economy of a nature, a positive gain is registered by their actions. A firm new ground is conquered for the Spirit's glory. To know of such pathfinders and leaders is also to walk in the safety of their lead. It appears that in the midst of life's harshness, Yudhishthir's faith in the efficacy of the dharma, though sterling and incontingent, got shaken. In that mood of despondency, a situation almost amounting to a crisis of consciousness had arisen in him. He is puzzled how Draupadi, fair and noble, ever virtuous in her conduct, could have been a victim to the cruelty, the uncouthness of the world. She was born from the fire altar without undergoing the trauma of the ordinary mortal birth, and yet it looked as though she was subjected to time and fate and the workings of nature. She had never committed any sin, and from the worldly vices she was ever free. She had never misbehaved, nor was she guilty of any selfishness. Her chastity was that of a sacrificial flame, and she always offered her services and obeisances to the learned and the wise, to the Brahmins and to the noble and the holy. Why then did she suffer? This could be the real query of Yudhishthir, but he puts it in a different sense. He wants to know whether in the entire history of earth there was any woman who was afflicted in her life, like Draupadi, and had to brave misfortunes such as hers, whether there was another woman beaten with the rods of grief and pain, in spite of being straight and pious in her life's conduct. Markandeya's answer in the course of the narrative, while assuaging Yudhishthir's grief and suffering, moves over to the triumph of Dharma in the conflict of life. Savitri's case is taken as an example to illustrate her point. Her woe is as though it has become the quintessence of the woe of the entire world. She has made her choice in Satyavan as her husband, but he is doomed to die 1 year after the marriage. She had the foreknowledge of the event, and yet she did not deviate from her decision. Savitri, when advised by her father to choose another youth for a husband, asserts her firm resolve and tells him, "May he be of a short life or long life, with virtuous qualities, or else, without them, I have chosen him as my husband, and I shall choose not again." By perception does one first come to a certain conclusion, and then one holds it by speech. Only afterwards is it put into action. That perception of mine, for me, is the one single authority here. It is this inner perception, the dharma of a soul, that is more sacred to her than all the gains of a life or death. She cherishes it as the best guided principle and is willing to sacrifice everything else for its sake. Narad immediately recognizes the very spiritual quality of her statement and tells the king, "O great among men, firm and unperturbed is the understanding and discernment of your daughter Savitri. None can swerve her from that, and in every respect it is in conformity with the Dharma." He recommends Savitri's marriage with Satyavan and blesses them. Values more than even love are thus held supreme, values for which alone life becomes worth living. Compared with Savitri's calamity, knowingly to face the consequences of fate's evil edict, Draupadi's plight was of a relatively minor character. It was therefore possible for the Pandavas and for Draupadi to take help from the fortitude of righteousness upheld by Ashwapati's daughter. She has strewn the way, driven from within. She followed her long road. She finally succeeded. The path of truth virtue, difficult and slippery though it be, has been proved to be the path of happiness and salvation. The sage enjoins on Yudhishthir to accept it and to take courage by it. Indeed, he is suggesting Savitri's being driven from within as the true motive force in all actions, and Yudhishthir too must live by it. Therein are the greatest and surest values. It is in them that the luminous commerce of the creation can really flourish. Leaders and thinkers of society, the wise and the learned, the lawgivers and the sages, rishis and yogis, even the gods, therefore strive to establish these values, this conduct of righteousness, this being driven from within for life's fulfillment. Participation of the gods in this endeavor can be to a very large extent a guarantee of its success. Bright guardians of the law of the truth, they actively support and promote this adventure of the soul's progress in the light of a greater destiny. It is in this earthly welfare is also their own welfare. It is towards this that there is the common commitment of man and God to uphold the dharma. King Ashwapati is issueless. He is a performer of the yajanas, is skillful in work, has the welfare of the state at his heart, gives away great charities, is a follower of the dharma, has subdued his senses, is of a forgiving nature, and is always a speaker of truth. But he has no child. This is a blemish in the fulfillment of the dharma, and therefore must be removed. To beget a son is to assure the continuity of the ancestral line. It is only then that the duties in the conduct of dharma can perpetuate the order unimpaired. The maintenance of the virtuous race of a heroic community is the social concern of a good patriarchal ruler, and he must see that there is no break in it. There will be otherwise a breakdown of the structure itself. It is also the pride and fulfillment of man's manhood, the grihastha glory by which he establishes his superiority in life. To beget children is man's manliness. Indeed, without it, he cannot enter into the next stage of life, of vanaprastha. After this, after his death, the funeral rites have to be performed by his son, and without them, entry into heaven is also not possible. Tradition upholds the propagation of the race as a part of the dharma. The ancient rishis prayed to the gods and asked for a long life and for plenty and progeny. They considered the richness of the earth without children to be incomplete, and the gods too, understanding the necessity for the maintenance of law, granted to the righteous aspirants such boons. There is, in fact, a relationship of mutuality between the two. It is in sacrifice that the gods grow, and for the sacrifice to go on, the race of the righteous must continue. It is that which drives the wheels of life's superior urges. Retiring to the forest for a period of 18 days, Ashwapati resorts to severe austerities. He performs Savitri yajna and offers the goddess 100,000 oblations every day. It is by the alchemy of sacrifice that a wish or a desire can receive a fulfilling boon. Ashwapati's desire for a son was actually of a noble character and was meant for a noble cause. It was for continuance of the holy yajna itself. Besides, and more importantly, there was a great devotion in the performance of the sacrifice. The goddess Savitri, therefore, exceedingly glad as she was with the worship, emerges from the sacrificial flames and speaks to Ashwapati. Very gracefully, she tells him to ask for an appropriate boon. O King Sovereign, I am immensely pleased by your purity and chastity, by your abstinence and self-restraint, the observance of the rules of austerity, and all the heart with which you worship me in devotion. O Ashwapati, ruler of Madura, ask what you desire, the boon. Falter not in any way in performance of the duties of the dharma. It is indeed in the spirit of this non-faltering that Ashwapati reveals the purpose of his long and arduous tapasya and prays to Savitri. O goddess, it was with the intention of begetting children for performing religious rites that I had initiated this holy sacrifice. Grant several sons that the line of my ancestors may grow. If so pleased thou art, O goddess, I ask for this one boon that I entreat of thee, the twice born, the wise of the world. Tell me that the proper begetting of progeny is a great dharma. The goddess is ready with the boon. She had already mentioned it to Brahma, her father, about Ashwapati's performance of the yajna for a child. Brahma in his all wisdom bestows on him, through Ashwapati, the boon of the birth of an effulgent daughter. It looks as though the goddess herself has taken this birth. Savitri's taking birth as a princess is therefore charged with the mission of maintaining the dharma in the world. And because the birth is a sanction from the Supreme Himself, it is the highest dharma that she will uphold here, even in the face of the death. Mortality shall therefore know the most benevolent law for its redemption. Dharma's triumph in this creation is Savitri's one single concern and her sole task. She has hence accepted suffering in life for the fulfillment of the most praiseworthy purpose. Ashwapati was a strict follower of the path of Dharma. Even in his conjugal relationship, he had adopted the prescribed injunctions. When a daughter was born to him, he attended to her birthrights, Jatkarma, and named her Savitri, as was advised by the family priests. Savitri was brought up in a holy spirit. Savitri was brought up in a holy spiritual religious atmosphere and was given good education in the various branches of learning. She not only knew the worldly laws, but also acquired great mastery in the yoga of meditation. On a certain festive religious occasion, when she carried prasad to her father, she paid obeisances to him and stood respectfully by his side. When she went from place to place in quest of a life's partner, she visited several hermitages and gave away great wealth to the Brahmins and the learned. When her father had asked her to go and search again, after Narad had made the prophecy of Satyavan's death, she quoted sayings from the scriptures and politely stuck to her own decision. After her marriage, she served her parents-in-law most affectionately, though they were exiles and were living a life of forest hermits. Then, abnegating her own self, she made her life a sacrifice for the sake of her beloved husband. By her sweet and loving humble manners, she had become dear to the sages of the ashram. Indeed, she was ever driven from within, and her utterances always rang a yogic note. A large share of credit of such an upbringing must certainly go to her father. The daughter's education in the Vedic tradition is the responsibility of the father, and Ashwapati had fulfilled it well. A kind of completeness in the worldly duties is a part of the dharmic conduct which he followed fully. It gives a certain wholesomeness to life itself. Ashwapati, accepting Narad's advice to arrange for the marriage of Savitri with Satyavan, only goes to show his high regard for the sage who was his teacher and preceptor. It needs, indeed, tremendous courage to stand by his words when the doom is made known. Ashwapati is aware that what is decided is unavoidable and must be borne with the fortitude of the Dharma. A very exceptional aspect of Ashwapati's character emerges in his abiding by the words of his Guru in the most adverse situation of life. There is a secret foundation of faith in the Dharma and in values of noble conduct on which the entire visible edifice is built. Ashwapati has that faith, and he carries a conviction within him that ultimately everything will turn out to be beneficial and happy. Fate shall be ineffective in the face of Dharma. Narad's unexpected visit to him at this crucial juncture is itself a pointer in the direction of a happy ending. It looks as though a high predestined concern is there in every detail of life for the establishment of Dharma here. He ever listened to other sounds than meet the sense-formed ear. Thus, though like one who ever sits facing fate, he remained calm and contented. This poise in Dharma is the real key to success, irrespective of the adversities of this world or of invisible ones. The little Savitri episode, even like the mammoth of the Mahabharata, presents to us every now and then instances and aspects of daily life founded on principles of the Dharma. That seems to be the common thread weaving the whole of the narrative. Be it the marriage proposal, or the coronation ceremony, or the funeral rites, All have to be conducted according to the prescribed norms, norms that have been evolved and renewed by the learned Brahmins and sages, the fulfilled souls. Ashwapati retires to the forest and performs the yajna and returns, after getting the boon to rule again over the kingdom. Exiled Yumatsen lives the life of a king sage, but has no hesitation in going back to the capital to resume his rule as soon as the kingdom comes to him once more. The duty of the Kshatriya, of the warrior prince, has to be performed for the full maintenance of the social order. For him, this duty is his dharma and is above everything, even above sagehood at this stage. The sages of the forest approved of it, and the sages too, though ever absorbed in tapasya and given to spiritual practices, were not world shunning recluses cut off from the stream of active life. Indeed, they participated in life in a greater manner for its fullness. But that participation was from an entirely different level where the worldly and non worldly conflicts do not exist. To put it in the words of Sri Aurobindo's Savitri, one soul to all and free from narrowing bonds, large like a continent of warm sunshine. In wide equality's impartial joy, these sages breathed for God's delight in things, assisting the slow entries of the gods, sowing in young minds immortal thoughts they lived, taught the great truth to which man's race must rise, or open the gates of freedom to a few, imparting to a struggling world the light. They breathe like spirits from time's dull yoke released. Comrades and vessels of the cosmic force, using a natural mastery like the sun's, their speech, their silence was a help to earth. In Vyasa tale of Savitri itself, we have an illustration of how the sages participated in human affliction as much as in jubilation. Savitri has won back the soul of Satyavan from Yama, but they are late in returning to the ashram. Dyumatsen is very worried about his son's fate and is tormented by horrible, ominous thoughts. He goes around from place to place, almost in madness, inquiring him from everybody. The Brahmins of the ashram, speakers of the truth world, console him in various ways. The Suvarchas tell him, his wife Savitri, I know, is engaged in tapasya and has control over the senses and is of a good, well poised conduct. From that I can proclaim that Satyavan is alive. Similarly, Gautam asserts, I have studied the Vedas and all their six limbs, accumulated great might of ascesis, observed the strictest celibacy from my earthly youth, and pleased well my preceptors and the fire god. I have completed with the power of concentration all the vows, and in former times I had observed meticulously the fasting rites by nourishing myself with the air only. I can, by the strength of these faultless austerities, know all the movements of others. Take, therefore, what I assert to be true, that Satyavan is living.